We're about to go into the health check with Dr. Kieran Bhagat. And yeah, man, all of us are looking for a good summer body and a long, happy life. So make sure to catch it.
Health Check is proudly brought to you by First Capital Bank. Belief comes first.
So if you're just tuning into the show, this is the House of Zoo with your boy So all the way up until 12 p.m. And as promised, we've got Dr. Kieran Bhagat on the phone to come give us some tips about the healthy lifestyle that we all need to live. Hi, Dr. B.
Hey, how are you? How's summer treating you?
I'm great, Dr. B. It's okay. It's getting a bit better as we go on, but I still wish it was winter. How are you?
Yeah, I think it gets a bit toasty. You know, we're waiting for the rain now. We just hope and pray it comes.
Yeah, this hot weather is absolute hell to deal with, honestly. So I guess we're talking about addiction today, Dr. B.
We do, and this has been brought back by demand. We did it sometime last year, and it seemed to have phased a lot of people, because the idea of addiction to most people is usually, to alcohol or to some of the substance abuses. But I mean, addiction is a big topic, and it's something that the public need to understand. And let's just talk about, first of all, what's the true meaning of addiction. Basically, addiction develops when the urge to take something, a substance or an activity hijacks a part of the brain that we call the reward part of the brain, and provides benefit for the body. So, it means not having control over doing, taking, or using something to the point where it eventually becomes harmful to you. And there are lots of reasons for addiction, but I think it's really important to understand that addiction applies to lots of things. You could be addicted to, obviously, alcohol, tobacco. It could be you're addicted to the television. You're addicted to shopping. You're addicted to, like the late Michael Jackson. You're addicted to cosmetic surgery. There are lots of things. You're addicted to gambling. So the same processes that go on. You can be addicted to chocolate, to sweets. Yeah. So it's something that people shouldn't cast blame on. He's an alcohol addict or he's a marijuana addict. These things apply today. People are also addicted to work. People are workaholics for lots of reasons. And I think it's important to understand that this is a broad-based definition in terms of addiction. And there's certain factors that can make or affect the likelihood of developing addiction. And of course, sadly, there is a family history. There's a family history of addiction. We know there's genetic predisposition. It's the reason why often addiction runs in families. Alcoholism, substance abuse runs in families, because there is what's called an addictive gene, believe it or not, that some people, if they taste something, they're much more likely to crave it than somebody else. And so the ability to hold back and to resist is less there. So believe it or not, there is chemistry in your brain that may make you more addicted. Addiction is more likely if you have a mental disorder, if you're depressed, if you've got a psychiatric condition. There's peer pressure today with our youngsters, our teenagers. The trying teenage brain, which wants to go out and explore, may explore things that are actually not good for them. Before they know it, they're actually developed a habit and an addiction. And then, of course, early use. If you're taking early, particularly, we're going to be talking about in a few series to come, the issue of vaping, which is increasing in our communities, and we're seeing a big problem with that issue in terms of children starting this and eventually becoming addicted to much more toxic compounds. So these are the types of addiction. Now, before we jump into questions, there are basically three types of addiction. One is a behavioral addiction, where people are addicted to alcohol or drugs, and then there's substance addiction, which is, for example, a sleeping pill. You can't do without the sleeping pill. You're physically dependent on it. And then there's impulse addiction, where racing a car down, the highway, where you act on an impulse. There's kleptomania, where you have the irresistible urge to steal things. So believe it or not, these are physical, emotional, and mental issues to do with addiction. So it's really important to understand. And clever clinical psychologists and neurologists have identified areas in the brain that are called the crave areas of the brain that are stimulated when that reward, whatever it is, whether it's the tobacco or the alcohol or the sugar or the chocolate, it triggers it and gives you this sort of euphoric feeling, and you want to have more of that stuff. And unfortunately, with addiction, the brain gets used to it, so you need to take more and more and more, and eventually, before you know it, whether it's to painkillers, to alcohol, to tobacco, to fizzy drinks, you're just consuming out of control, and then it begins to affect your health.
Yes.
So how do you tell if somebody's addicted? Well, the signs that somebody's addicted is usually a change in personality. Their behavior becomes that of lack of motivation, irritability, agitation, unless they're getting their substance abuse. So often we see in our patients bloodshot eyes and frequent bloody noses if they're sniffing things, and believe it or not, it happens in Botswana where they're sniffing strange chemicals. They get shakes and tremors, they get slurred speech. We notice their change in daily routine. They don't pitch up for work, they take sick leave or absence. There's a lack of concern for personal hygiene, and there's an unusual need for money. Often, with the young, the financial, so if it's in a youngster, you might find things going missing in the house. And we often find that parents complain that their child is addicted, and they found that their purse is empty or something's been sold. So these are really important things. So remember, when we talk about addictive behaviors, we talk about all sorts of things. Gambling, internet shopping, video games, plastic surgery, binge eating, all sorts of stuff is addiction. And we often say that the roots of addiction can be chronic stress, a history of trauma, mental illness, a family history. So the clinical psychologist has to actually delve in and tease out some of the reasons that may actually go back into childhood as to why this particular adult now is addicted to whatever they're addicted to. So it's really important to try and not place blame and understand where the issue of addiction comes in. And that's what people do. And so the best two methods of getting people through addiction is what we call CBT, which stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. This is where it's an approach that identifies and changing the thoughts and behaviors that play part in addictions. And the other one is what's called mindfulness therapy, where mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy is where you begin to actually watch yourself and watch the addiction begin to rise in your body, and don't stop it, but just see what happens to your body and the way your body behaves. And you begin to understand that you're actually in a very strange way. So you actually get a mirror to the person and say, look, this is actually what you're doing in terms of addiction. So that's really important to understand. And somebody's asked you already, can the brain... I have been addicted myself to chocolates and now to alcohol, and I don't know what to do about it. Can the brain heal itself? Well, the first thing you need to do is the first thing about addiction is admission that you're addicted. Often people don't want to admit that they're addicted to, whether it's work or whether it's tobacco or alcohol. They want to admit that they're actually dependent on the substance. The first thing is admission. And then, yes, indeed, the brain is incredibly resilient and possesses the abilities to repair itself through a process which we call neuroplasticity. And this is basically where you change the way the brain thinks through a process of cognitive behavioral therapy. So these are really important things to understand.
Yes.
Some ask here, does addiction get worse over time? Yes, it does. If untreated for a long time, it tends to actually get you out of control, where you lose your job, you lose your family, you lose your friends, you become housebound, and of course then you become broke because you're spending all your money on your addiction. So this is really an important issue. Somebody says here, in Botswana, where do we go? There are lots of places there. There are psychologists and social workers both in the public and the private sector. They're all over the country, and if you have an issue or you have somebody that you care about that has an issue, there are places that you can go and ask for treatment, for assessment, and in some situations we actually admit you to hospital to try and or like you go cold turkey, where we actually begin to withdraw you from the alcohol or whatever addiction that you have. So it can actually be available in many parts of our country.
Yes. I've got an interesting question, Dr. B, that I want to ask. It's based off of something that you said about the genetic predisposition of addiction. I never knew that addiction could be hereditary or you could pass it on through familial lines. How does that work?
There's a certain part in the brain that's called the reward center, which sort of lights up and sparks up the moment you take a particular substance, whether it's chocolate, whether it's alcohol, whatever it is. And the ability for that lighting up to calm down varies in different people. And there are certain genetic traits which actually demand almost that you go back and take that substance. It's what's called the serotonin and the dopamine pathways in the brain. And these reward centers in some people never switch off, so they're constantly on a high, constantly seeking a high. Even dangerous things like bungee jumping and fast cars and taking risks. And there's chemistry involved in there. So now that's not to say that we should blame our genes. We people often say to me, Naka, I'm overweight because my parents are overweight. That's not the reason why your parents are overweight, probably because they also ate the wrong food and are feeding you the wrong food. So yes, the genes the genes are the bullet in the gun, but the thing that triggers the genes is the environment. So the environment in which that addiction is operating is a good caring family, good parenthood, good teachers, good schools, good peers, good friends around you. You are the sum of the people that you hang around with. So if you hang around with bad company, you're going to get into trouble. And if you have this addictive gene, it'll trigger it. So yes, you can have a genetic predisposition, but it doesn't mean that you're lost to addiction.
Yes. And speaking about environment, Doc, there's been a special case in our country where one of the youth in our country, he became quite a bit famous online because of the experience that he had been through. He had had a drug addiction for quite a while, and he went to South Africa to get treatment, right? But there's a lot of news and there's a lot of sightings of him not being well and not being rehabilitated. What are the things that we can do to make sure that people don't fall back into the same environment that made them have addictions in the first place?
I think the most important thing is to make sure that the environment in which they are operating, if you know somebody's out of rehab, because you're absolutely right, the relapse rate of people who've been addicted is actually quite high because they enter back into the same environment, whether it's a traumatic environment, an abusive environment, a family stress environment, a financial environment. So often the things that trigger the stress, you go for a quick fix, and if you're addicted to sugar or candy or donuts or marguinha, you go back into that, and as a result, you're just triggering the same thing. So the most important thing is to make sure, or try and make sure, that the environment in which you return the rehabilitated individual, say for example, it's alcohol, it's not in, if you don't buy it, it's not there. If it's out of sight, out of mind. So, whatever it is that you're addicted to, you just don't buy it, it's not in your shopping basket, and it's not in your environment. And of course, if friends and peers were the ones that triggered your addiction, you need to get out of that company, because you go back into that company. We're all human at the end of the day, and temptation is just around the corner, and this is the reason why a lot of people fall off the bandwagon in terms of going back into their addictive habits.
Yes. I don't know if you have any more questions that you'd like to answer, Dr. B.
We've got lots here. Somebody's asked here, what things can you be addicted to? We've answered that. It's smartphones, caffeine, chocolates, shopping, gambling, exercise. People are addicted to exercise as well. So these are really important issues. Somebody's asked here, what are the main characteristics? And we've answered this. It's irritability, it's mood changes, it's bloodshot eyes, it's shaking and tremor, it's becoming irritable. So these are really important issues. Somebody's asked you, how can you tell if somebody's addicted? Well, that's the answer to that is the same thing. So these are really important issues in terms of brain addiction. So people out there, and I know that we have a broad range of listeners. So if you have issues, please go and see the social worker in a public hospital, or seek out a psychologist, because there are lots of them there today. You don't need to travel across the border to get rehabilitated, and it's not costly, particularly in the public sector. So please go out and reach out for help, whether it's a parent, whether it's a brother or a sister or a neighbor, and you think something's going on. Please try and get them to see somebody.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. B, for coming on the show. Actually speaking about addiction is so important, because right now in our country we are really fighting a serious problem against addictions of all kinds, especially drugs. So I think it's a really a good thing for people to hear out there that they need to get help, and there are places where that exist that they can get help. And thank you so much for giving all of that information today.
It's my pleasure. The topic for next week is care of the dying. It's another topic that we've been asked to talk about, care of the terminally ill. It's a touchy subject and something that's important, because everybody around them has had somebody who's been near to death or has died. And so how do you manage somebody who is nearing death?
I'm excited for that one. Here or not, I'll be listening to it for sure.
Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you, Dr. B. Happy Independence Weekend to you.
You too. Thank you.